Hello, romance lovers! Today's story is called Reincarnated as a Baby Shinsu. If you enjoy our videos, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss out on more exciting stories. Thank you for watching. On a beautiful rainbow morning, the fox explored the forest, but no matter how far she ran, the forest did not end. Seeing a hole near a tree, she thought what a charming place it was, and jumped into it. The fox gradually begins to realize that she is, in fact, Yanel de Rokim. Yanela de Rokim was a princess of the Rochim Empire. The emperor adored her completely, even though she was the last in line to the throne. He was saddened that she was born a girl, but she was not at all interested in power, because the throne belonged to her brother, Agris de Roakim. She loved her family and was happy with them. Until one day she saw a chilling scene. Her father, bloodied and with a dagger in his chest. Yanel rushed towards him, looking up. She saw her brother with blood-stained hands. She couldn't believe her eyes. Agris pulled the dagger from his father's body and swung it at his sister. Yanel fell to the ground, bleeding. She reached out to him, calling out for her brother with her last strength, to which he replied that she was disgusting. Yanel began to cry. Sound of the ocean. Yanel finds herself in some dark space, beginning to wonder if she is dead. The girl feels the walls. They are glad to see her awake. Yanel is confused, not understanding who they are and where did that tail come from. Cat paws instead of hands. Suddenly, one of the strangers transforms into a huge fox. Yanel involuntarily lets out a scream, but this scream does not sound like a human scream, rather like the cry of an animal. Realizing that they are frightening her, the stranger transforms into a man. And finally, the girl begins to understand that she has died and has been reborn. The castle becomes noisy. Everyone is discussing the news that the emperor died last night and that Princess Yanel killed him. It was raining. He and Yanel were getting wet under a tree. She asked him if he was thinking about what he wanted to do in the future. For in her eyes, Lord Abelard was no ordinary sunny forest dawn. Lenore, a fox in human form who became Yanel's new father, is looking for a little fox sleeping in the bushes. The girl tried to deny the truth, being sure that it was just a dream. And now, a month later, she finally accepted the new reality. But she still did not understand why exactly a divine beast. Long ago, divine beasts emerged from the fragments of the god. Silver foxes, golden lions, blue whales, red wolves, white eagles, and green snakes. Divine beasts, who inherited the power of the god, could communicate with nature and spirits. They took care of the sky and the earth, the seas and the rivers. But one day, trouble came. The animals, with their combined efforts, were able to protect the continent, but since then, no one has seen them. And all because they hid in a distant forest and never showed up again. The forest gave way to a river. Her father carried Yanel on his back, moving extremely quickly, which surprised her very much. Her parents always know where she is, even though they let her go for a walk alone, but they still keep an eye on her. The egg from which Yanel hatched was half the size of a normal egg. She couldn't get out of the shell for 10 years. My parents named me Lucia. In addition, after the disaster, the divine beast lost contact with the spirits. However, some part of the divine powers remained. It can be used from birth, for example, to turn into a human. And if you have a talent for fencing or magic, you can direct your powers in this direction. Lucia, perhaps because she remembers her past life, can't turn into a human. She can't even talk. Yanel doesn't understand why her brother killed them. After all, the throne would never have passed to her anyway. She really wants to ask him why, but the little fox understands that even if she meets him, Lenore stroked her cheek and took her in his arms, asking if she was angry because he had prevented her from conquering the north. Had he hurt her sense of dignity? Of course not. They arrived at a huge cave. Lenore called out to Seriu, Lucy's mother. Meanwhile, she was doing magic. The cave was very beautiful. Everything inside was covered in crystals that glowed brightly. Syria was worried when she saw them, asked if Lucia was sleeping, to which Lenore replied that she was not sleeping. She was quite tired. But the father also did not refuse hugs. Lucia felt very awkward, as she was still not used to their relationship. There was a letter on the table. Mother asked father to read it. Lenore laughed, asking how long Syria would continue to speak so formally, since they now had Lucia and could communicate with complete freedom. It depressed him that everyone still thought he was her master. Father reads a letter in which it is written that the Emperor of Rokim has changed since the previous one was killed. Lucia trembled. At the end of the letter, it is said that the murderer is Princess Ionel de Rokim. She killed the Emperor and then committed suicide. Lucia is stunned. She can't believe her ears. This is all Agris's plan. He killed her and their father and then put all the blame on her. The fox burst into tears. Mom and Dad started offering her treats, trying to somehow calm their daughter down. They were confused, not understanding her reaction. Father thought about how to calm her down, as he was worried that she would soon collapse without strength. Mother gently wiped the tears from her, but Lucia didn't stop crying. She was furious at this injustice. She wanted to tell everyone the truth. Someday, she would tell the whole world what happened. Opening her eyes, Lucia found that she had fallen asleep in the bed with her fox parents. Well, at least she felt much better now. She thought she had to find out what was happening in the Empire as soon as possible. The longer she waited, the harder it would be to uncover the truth. But Yanel couldn't get out of the forest alone. The fox really wanted to talk, so she tried with all her might to concentrate and say everything clearly. In her attempt to start talking, she only heard an animal squeak. Reality is harsh, and determination alone cannot change it. Meanwhile, the parents woke up. They were glad that the baby was cheerful and assumed that Lucia was hungry. The mother fed her daughter berries from her hands. Lenore flashed his magic, saying that he needed to go to the human world. If he didn't take action, Vermont might attack the forest. And besides, it wouldn't be a bad idea to pay a visit to the imperial family. The silver fox is considered the patron of these lands, so the father decided to see what was going on there. Lucia jumped to the floor and ran to her father, clinging to his leg. After all, she might not have another chance. She had to persuade her father, but the mother suddenly screamed negatively. Explaining that the human world is dangerous, the baby is not ready yet. She cannot let her go. Syria began to persuade her daughter that her father should go alone and that they would prepare well and go later. Ionel did not lose her head. She chose her father as a sacrifice. Lenore thought about it while he was thinking. Lucia started to cry. The father began to convince the mother that she would be safe with him. But Saria pointed out that Lucia still hadn't gone through the ceremony, to which Lenore objected, saying that the ceremony was just a name, just a bunch of divine beasts coming to stare at their girl. Lenore hugged Saria, convincing her not to worry. Her trust in him was directly proportional to Lucia's safety. Besides, the baby really wanted to go. They walked along a forest path. The father carried the baby wrapped in cloth. Since the mother was very worried, she swaddled her and gave them a blanket, cookies, and fruit for the road. Before going to the world of people, the father explained to the little girl that there are 3 immutable laws. First, you can't interfere with the course of history. Second, no one should know who you are. And finally, it is forbidden to fall in love with people. If they find out that Lucia breaks even one of the rules, she will be taken to the elders and locked in the divine forest forever. Although her father thinks that all these taboos are complete stupidity, suggesting that on top of the castle fluttered a flag with the coat of arms of the Elharan family. The guard, seeing the approach of the Duke, immediately ran to ring the bell. The gates opened, the guards came out to bow. To greet His Grace Duke Elharan, which frightened the little girl very much. But the father held Lucia in his arms proudly and securely. Lenore Karl Elharan. The Duke was famous for carefully avoiding all kinds of banquets and receptions. He was so unsociable that he sometimes ignored the order. Very few could boast of being close to him. But at the same time, no one looked down on him. The Duke was the master of the impregnable Edelbader Mountains and the ice wall to the north. His skill with the sword was legendary, but it was not so much a legend. The Duke really did save Rochim. The rumors about him were truly contradictory. Some said that he was a bloody killer who reveled in violence. Some imagined him as an ugly old man, and some as a beautiful youth. After all, few people knew him personally. The Duke was a mystery, a secret, shrouded in darkness. There were many rumors about where he constantly disappeared from the castle. He was, after all, a divine beast. They entered the palace, walking down a long corridor lined with antique furniture and candlesticks, and were confronted by the butler, Aiden. This clearly made his father nervous. Having greeted the Duke, the butler reminded him that he had a lot of work to do, and it wouldn't hurt to get back to it. Opening the door of the room, their eyes were met with huge piles of papers. Lenore was upset by the butler's less than cordial reception and attempted to offer to organize a banquet, to which Aiden responded negatively and pushed the Duke towards the table. The little girl was walking on the table, playing with papers. The father asked the butler if anything had happened while he was away. Aiden told the Duke that the barbarians had found a way to get past the wall. Lenore, with a stern expression, noted that, Daddy noticed the frightened baby, picked her up. He began to smile, saying that later they would go on a hike. He carried the baby to his chambers in order to calm her down. Lucia couldn't even imagine that her dad could be like this. He was always sweet and caring. And now? The little girl rejected these thoughts because what does it matter what kind of Duke he is? He is still her beloved dad. The father's heart melted. He was a little upset that he couldn't show off his lovely baby to anyone. Daddy asked Lucia to stay here and sleep while he finished his business, to which the baby responded with a joyful squeal. She began to lie down when suddenly a flash of light appeared. A portal appeared from which an unknown person came out. His necklace seemed familiar to the fox. Could it really be the arch-mage himself? But where did he come from? He appeared out of thin air. The arch-mage headed for the Duke's chambers for some reason. Suddenly he noticed the fox and was no less surprised than she was. He quickly headed towards the fox, trying to catch it, but he managed to grab it by the tail, lifting the baby upside down, examining and identifying Lucia as a ball of fur. The fox was scared. The rude archmage had been looking at himself for a long time, she thought. He held her in this position, examining and ridiculing her, as if she were an ordinary, useless ball of fur. The fox was indignant. The baby's stomach began to rumble. Despite such a delicate situation, she felt very ashamed. At this time, the Duke discusses the incident with the barbarians with the butler. Aiden explains that Vermont was watching the wall while the Duke was away, but as soon as he left, the enemies took advantage and attacked. 20 people were injured, many houses were destroyed. It is not yet clear why, but the barbarians have become much more active in the last month. Father noted that this began to happen just when Lucia was born. The butler was surprised and asked again if he was talking about that little fox, to which the Duke smiled affirmatively, calling the little girl by her full, beautiful name, Stella. But her parents call her Lucia. Lenore ordered the butler to serve her faithfully. Aiden sweetly agreed that the name was charming. The Duke asks what has been heard from the Rocham family. The butler presents 3 letters. Lenore, taking them, smiles and remarks how funny the Rocham family is. The butler emphasizes that he must respond immediately. As a flash of light suddenly appears outside the window, the father realizes that it is time for him to take up someone's upbringing. Vermont presents the fox with a plate of various fruits. The mages, looking into the room, tensely try to stop the archmage, reminding him that the fruits are needed for experiments and that they cannot be fed to the fox. Rules are rules, and the archmage is no exception. Vermont slams the door, irritated. Lucia looks around. There are even more books here than in the Imperial Library. She wonders if they are in the Tower of the Magicians, since those people seem to her similar to the magicians of the Runehilt Order. Lucia greedily pounces on the food. She is surprised by the presence of fruits from the divine forest in the castle. Could they really have been grown by wizards? The little girl enjoys the fruits, thinking that the Runehilt magicians are really special. The archmage stared at the fox. He exhaled with the words, "Stupid brat." Despite his insults, he carefully wiped the fox's muzzle. There was a knock at the door, announcing that Master Vermont had a visitor from Rokham. The archmage was busy, but a plaintive voice could be heard from behind the door, begging to be admitted, as he was shouting that he would not leave until he personally met the tower keeper. The fox was extremely surprised that the man who stole her from her father's chambers turned out to be of such a high position. Vermont asked what he wanted and was told that the man wanted to reveal the truth about the Emperor's death. The fox became excited. Reveal the truth about the Emperor's death. The prince tried his best to hide all the evidence and make Yanel guilty. He covered his tracks and got the throne he so dearly desired, but he not only killed the princess, but also accused her of his terrible crime. And now everyone in Rokham thinks the princess is a villain who killed her own father. It seems the guest from Rochim has another version of what happened. It seems that at least someone believes that the princess is innocent. Vermont wondered if the fox was still hungry. At least Lucia had the appetite of a divine beast, he thought, which is why the fox had to bite the dim-witted archmage's finger. Vermont looked at his hand, puzzled. The fox glared at the arch-mage, as if to suggest that the rest of his fingers would be in danger if he did not receive such an important guest. The voice behind the door demanded a final answer. Vermont agreed to accept the guest, ordering the fox to stay here. The little girl tried to catch up with the arch-mage, but the door slammed right in front of her. Ionel sat on the floor, her ears hanging down. Of course, it wasn't as bad as it could have been. At least there were still those who believed in the princess's innocence. As long as at least one person believed in her, there was a chance to reveal the truth. Vermont entered the room where 3 guests were waiting for him. The guests were very surprised by the appearance of the arch-mage. Vermont thought irritably, if they thought that he would not come out to them, why did they continue? The guests bow and thank the master for agreeing to meet them. Vermont nobly sits down in a chair. The guests begin to introduce themselves when suddenly the arch-mage stops them. Here, their birth and title have no meaning. The Tower of Mages is sovereign, meaning it is not subordinate to any state. The master cut off their thoughts that their title gives them any advantage. Vermont insists on getting to the heart of the matter. The guests want to reveal the truth about the death of the previous emperor. The master says that the truth is already known. A mad princess killed her father in a fit of rage and then committed suicide. The arch-mage did not hide his face distorted by the absurdity he had heard. That is why the guests from Rokim had come to ask for help from one of the Vermont mages, so they could prove the princess's innocence. The arch-mage stood up negatively and rushed to the exit. The master followed them with a remark that they must offer something of equal value or get lost. The guests jumped up and cried out in unison, the name and honor of Perenabaloda. He paused, wondering what kind of fool the commander of the Holy Order of Knights was. Lord Abelard said that the arch-mage would agree if he knew that he was ready to put even his name on the line. To which Vermont agreed. Lucia sat sadly by the window. It was so high that she could see the clouds below. It seemed to her that if she fell, she would literally become a ball of wool. As suddenly an unknown thread tied her, screaming that she could fall, the arch-mage entered the tower. Taking the fox in his arms, he snapped his fingers. The office immediately began to shine with a blue glow. They shifted. Opening their eyes, Lucia saw a sword pointed at Vermont's throat. In front of them stood their father, who was happily trying to convey to the arch-mage that it wouldn't hurt to warn him if he wanted to babysit his little sister. To which Vermont asked if a brother had to ask permission to spend time with his sister. Lucia was very surprised that the arch-mage was her brother. Although, if you think about it, they are similar. There is something of both parents in him. The conflict between the men grew. The father threatened that if Vermont was even a second late, he would destroy his tower. To which the brother objected, emphasizing that the Tower of the Magicians was not a toy. Looking at this, the fox thought that Vermont's character definitely took after his father. Daddy picked up the baby and quietly asked if her brother had ever hurt her. The baby tensed up, remembering their acquaintance. Anyway, he fed her and returned her safe and sound. He was also worried that she might fall out of the window. Lenore hugged the little one pitifully, to which his brother was indignant, since he had simply taken her to feed her. Vermont suddenly asked his father if this ball of wool was the reason for his leaving the castle. The father was upset to hear his son call his sister, emphasizing that his mother would be very upset to hear this. Lucia squeaked in confirmation. Dad gave the baby to the butler, saying he would be back soon. Saddling his horse, Lenore invited his son to ride and discuss everything in private. It was getting dark. Returning from his walk, the brother was gloomy. It was a surprise to him what his father had to go through. Dad, however, happily grabbed the baby. At breakfast, Vermont had to spread jam on his bread, which he did not like, emphasizing that it was exploitation of labor. His father, in turn, reminded him that it would not hurt to work off the money he had borrowed to repair the tower. The son cried out in irritation that he had returned everything, but his father hastened to remind him about the interest. Father noticed how pityingly Lucia looked at her irritated brother and pushed her to go and talk to him. Dad emphasized that they didn't even know each other's full names and introduced Luistella. The fox came up to her brother and put her paw to his face. Vermont took the baby by the front paws and introduced himself. Lucia squealed happily. At first, he seemed mean and rude to her. And although he can be arrogant at times, he is actually kind and caring. Vermont suddenly remembered and asked his father if he had heard anything about Peyran. Abalode. Lucia pricked up her ears with interest. Peyran Abalod. He had no title, no wealth, no one to follow him. When he joined the knights, he had only a sword. And although the beginning was far from promising, after only 3 months, everyone in the palace knew about him. And that's why he won an unprecedented victory in a knight's tournament. The emperor congratulated him personally and appointed him as the princess's bodyguard, but not the prince's. He was incredibly talented. He should have been an army commander, but the emperor loved his daughter so much that he appointed him her personal bodyguard. Peyran did his job perfectly. No more, no less. Ianel wanted to get closer to him, trying to talk to him over and over again. Once she casually offered him the delicious candies she had given him, to which Abelard apologized and abruptly walked away. The princess tried to be kind to her perfect bodyguard, but she could not break the ice between them. They stood on the same grass, breathed the same air, but were never together. That's why Ianel didn't trust him. And he apparently didn't trust her. One day he came and said that he was going to the front and asked for her consent. There was a war in the south. He could not participate in it and be the princess's bodyguard at the same time. She decided that she would not interfere with him and agreed. Their difficult relationship, which lasted a year, eventually ended in nothing. Peyran won a series of resounding victories in the south and led the country to victory. He received the well-deserved title of the best knight and became the commander-in-chief of the Sacred Order, blessed by the archbishop himself. They never saw each other again. The princess only occasionally heard rumors about him. Vermont told his father about recent guests who came on behalf of Peyran and that they claimed that the princess was innocent. The fox was dumbfounded. He had been her bodyguard for only a year. They weren't even friends. Father remembered that while he was in the forest, he heard rumors about him. They say Peyran went crazy. Lenore noted that after Vermont's story, these rumors did not seem so baseless. No one in their right mind would throw their name around. The son spoke of an upcoming meeting with Abelard. Lucia was very upset that they were talking so actively about Peyran, and she didn't even have the opportunity to ask them if they were close to him. Vermont stroked her, asking her father if it was too early to take her with them, since she had hatched a week ago. Lenore corrected his son a month ago. Vermont was very surprised because the baby was very small. The fox cub drooped. She knows that she is growing slowly, but she can't do anything about it. Father says that he is going to the capital. The prince has given him an audience. Vermont insists on going with his father. In addition, he promised to send one of the most powerful magicians to Peyran. And there was a week left before the trip to the imperial palace. Meanwhile, Lenore decided to return to his duties as a duke. The butler again brought a mountain of documents, which filled the entire table. The duke really hoped that this was a joke, to which Aiden replied in the negative. This was all that had accumulated during his absence. Dad asked Lucia to hold her paw. The butler noticed what an unusual coloring Lenore's daughter. The proud father added that he had never seen such a thing in divine beasts. The fox tensed up. Aiden was a man. And what about the rules? The father, seeing his daughter's fear, began to calm her down, explaining that he was on the border of two worlds. Dad would have been happy to tell more, but the butler insistently asked him not to be distracted from his work. Lenore laughed, the butler, and shut the mouth of the Duke himself, and got down to work. Lucia was terribly curious about this border, but she didn't want to distract them. 7 hours later, Father is absorbed in work. 12 hours later, Daddy hugged his daughter, noticing how tired she was, and suggested that she take a walk and look around the palace. It was time to explore all the secret corners. The Rocham Empire. The princess's palace is located directly opposite the emperor's palace, and both were left without owners. Just a month ago, the princess and the emperor were visiting each other along the long corridors. Agris couldn't believe that just a month ago, a brutal murder had taken place here. Because of this incident, the nobles decided to leave the imperial palace. No one wanted to live near the crime scene. Besides, the prince enters the room where he is met by the red-haired princess, who is very happy to see him and was looking forward to their meeting. The princess says that she will live here from tomorrow. She praises the magnificent palace and is glad that its mistress has died because now she will take her place. Sitting in the kitchen, Lucia is embarrassed by the attention of the cook and the maid, who offer her cookies straight from the oven. Another kitchen worker runs up, holding milk in his hands. Some time ago, the little girl was running around, exploring the palace, looking into every corner, but then she was attracted by the aroma. It seemed like they were baking bread for dinner. It also smelled like apples. What a sweet aroma. While the fox was sniffing around, the cook, not noticing her, almost stepped on her tail, got scared and fell. The kitchen workers were surprised to see a fox there. Suddenly, they remembered. Now, Lucia is eating pies. She is not hungry, of course. But how can she resist when everything is fresh and looks so wonderful? And most importantly, smells. Suddenly, a familiar song is heard. Lucia looks around with interest to see where it could be coming from. The kitchen worker loses control of the pot of soup, and it flies straight towards the little girl. The kitchen workers are horrified. Lucia is even more frightened, and some unknown barrier protected the fox. No one understood how it happened. Everyone rushed to her worriedly. The man who had lost the pot begged for forgiveness. The little girl is perplexed. Did her abilities really manifest? No, she can't even turn into a human. Some unknown force protected her. A week later, father and son are going to the palace. Of course, no one planned to take Lucia with them, so she took control of the situation and deftly grabbed her father's back. But before her father could leave the room, Lucia was discovered by her brother. Daddy turned around and beamed, saying that he couldn't leave her. The kindest brother noted that there was a risk that the fox would catch fleas in the capital, to which the father suggested turning her into a human, since his son knew how to do it. His face distorted in indignation, the brother exhaled and began to work his magic. The room shone with a bright blue light. Lucia pressed herself against her dad, but could not tear her eyes away from her brother. Suddenly, blue threads wrapped around her body and lifted her up. The arch-mage cast a spell. The threads wrapped around the body so much that nothing could be seen beyond them. The baby opened her eyes and her surprised brother stood in front of her, saying that she was growing so slowly that she was still a baby. When the spell wears off, she returns to her normal form. The baby, having realized the human body, made an attempt to speak, but only cute baby coos came out. The father claimed that Lucia called him dad, while the brother was absolutely sure that she said brother. A heavy atmosphere hung in the air, and only Lucia understood that she had only asked if she was a baby. The baby finally became human, but she didn't feel any difference, being just as helpless. The quarrel between the men grew, and the child began to cry. The bright sun illuminated the beautiful palace. The garden was fragrant with various flowers and trees. The father proudly carried the baby in his arms. The son asked if he really wanted to introduce her as his daughter, to which he received a positive answer. Lucia was special to him. Divine beasts are independent by nature. They leave their parents early and occupy their own territory. There is nothing unusual about developing human lands. His father left his parents when he was only 1 year old. But Lucia was different. A month had passed and she hadn't grown a bit. If she couldn't stand up for herself, she would need a bodyguard. Duke El Heron. The guard informs the guests that His Highness the Prince is waiting for them in the drawing room. The father looked back, handed the baby to his son, and went to meet her. Lucia started crying. She hadn't come all this way to be left behind the door. Vermont approached the child's ear and hinted that if she continued to behave like this, she would turn into a handful of dust. The brother looked extremely convincing. It was hard to disagree. In order to pass the time while waiting for his father, Vermont asked the maid to take them to the garden. The little girl's eyes were wet. She was very upset that she could not meet the prince. The brother picked a rose, showing his sister what beautiful flowers they were, because roses were rare in the north. But in the imperial garden, they grew at every step. Hiding behind the bushes, the brother calmed his sister down. He began to work magic. Blue balls began to swirl around, and they became invisible. Vermont slipped past the guards. The little girl glanced at her brother, full of hope that he had some plans. They headed to the princess's palace. As they entered the palace courtyard, they heard a woman's scream, which attracted their attention. The princess was scolding her maid, Marion, furiously because the tea was too hot. The fox recognized the princess. Her name was Bianca. The red-haired princess waved her hand, and immediately another maid pounced on Marion. Mom died of malaria a month after Yanel was born. Dad looked after her. There was a time when she was left all alone. However, the maids took care of her. They filled the void in the girl's life, becoming her friends, her family. They were important to the princess. Yanel knew that no one would treat them like she did, but Bianca's treatment and discipline were simply monstrous. The child began to cry bitterly. She wanted it to stop so badly. For some unknown reason, the spell suddenly broke and the human baby turned into a fox. A melody began to play, just like in the kitchen, and the sky lit up with a bright pink flash that everyone in the palace saw. The sunny weather was replaced by an unexpected downpour. It seems that storm clouds will soon cover the entire country. Marion was lying on the ground. The fox rushed towards her, tugging at her clothes. She tried to drag her to a dry place, but the little girl only tore off a piece of fabric. Lucia covered the maid's face with her paws, trying to protect her from the rain. Suddenly, someone covered them with a cloak. The little girl turned around, seeing a tall, dark-haired man standing in front of her. He was the commander of the Sacred Order of the Knights of Peyran, Abelard. The maid began to dissolve. Lucia got scared. Her brother calmed his sister down, letting her know that she would be taken care of. Magic threads wrapped around the baby and pulled her to her brother. He hugged her and began to wipe her. Vermont turned his gaze to Peyran, wondering what he was doing here. The Lord had come at the prince's command. The arch-mage reminded him of the recent guests who had come in his name. Peyran confirmed that he had indeed sent them to the Tower of the Mages. Vermont was furious, enraged that the divine beast was throwing around his name so easily. The little girl was frightened and wondered if names really had any special meaning for the divine beasts. And then she began to comprehend what she had just heard. Peyran is a divine beast. That explained why his father and brother talked about him so much. They are all divine beasts, so they are so familiar. The Lord stared at the little girl. She tensed up, thinking that he recognized her. As soon as he wanted to speak, the brother introduced his sister. Vermont was angry that Peyran did not appear in the divine forest at all, did not even know that someone was born. But anyway, he would fulfill his request as he promised. Holding the baby, with the help of magic, they disappeared into thin air. The guard informs Sir Abelard that His Majesty is ready to receive him. The children returned to Lanor as soon as the audience was over and went to see the capital. Vermont sent Marian to the Duke's palace, where she was treated. The little girl was finally able to meet her. The maid was very grateful to his lordship. Marian introduces herself by saying that she works in the Imperial Palace. She was the nanny of Princess Ianel. Her hands are covered in plasters and bandages. Her face is bruised. Lenore apologizes for disturbing her in such a state, but he wants Marian to tell him what Princess Ianel was like. At breakfast, the little girl admired the special cookies prepared by Duke Elharan. They were in the shape of divine beasts. Father was telling me how yesterday Marian had said that the princess had been slandered. Yanel would never have harmed anyone, and certainly would not have run away from responsibility. She had a kind nature and a big heart. She was special. Marian had never met anyone like her. Hearing this, the little girl began to cry. The father noticed that the princess treated the servants well, and the child raised his head proudly. The meeting with the prince was rather strange. He said to bend the knee and submit to him, of course with more flattering speeches. The father decided to express only the essence of the prince's appeal. Father felt that if he refused, the prince would eat him alive. So he just smiled and left without saying anything. Vermont was burning with anger. The Elharans have remained neutral for generations. The prince, of course, knows this, and yet he tried to persuade the duke to his side. He must have something in mind. It seems that the calm before the storm will soon end. The father thinks that it is time to call Saria, the current mother of Ianel. And also, bring Hikan. Vermont's mind was clouded. He asked his father why this mad dog was here, to which his father replied that he was already in the capital. Vermont jumped up from his seat. Slamming his hand on the table, he was categorically against it. If they wanted a bright future for Lucia, they couldn't let this ignoramus near her. Lucia became curious. Father gently took her in his arms and asked her not to pay attention to the fact that her brother does not listen to Dad. There is no need to follow his example. Brother and Lucia went to the city. He was in a hurry, thinking that he needed to be on guard. Suddenly, some sly fox would decide to deceive them. Brother wasn't going to waste his precious time on him, so they used magic to move to the roof, in order to quickly sort everything out and go home. As Dad said, Hikan is now in the capital, escorting foreign nobles to the Great Temple. Herencia, the Holy Land where the Great Temple is located, borders the capital of Rokim. The spell should lead them to him. It pointed in the opposite direction of Herencia, which surprised Vermont greatly. When Vermont and his little girl reached the place indicated by the spell, they saw a massacre. Mercenaries fighting with villains. The brother was outraged by what the dog had done and closed the child's eyes. Vermont noticed a familiar emblem lying on the floor and, in the midst of the commotion, deftly pulled it towards him. The fight is over. The mercenaries lead the children out, pointing out that all the kidnapped children are here. The captain stretches and orders everyone. It seems he knew where he needed to go, took him to another job, and Vermont decided to follow him. A little later, the captain comes to an abandoned house. Yes, in such places, they obviously do something illegal. Turning around, he asked if Vermont had decided to brighten his day and fight him. To which the brother exhaled and kindly descended from the roof with his feet into the captain's face, thereby knocking him to the ground and asking if he really still wanted to fight. The captain was even more angered by this meeting, but he noticed the child and wondered if Vermont had managed to get married and have a child. Hikan picked up the baby, saying that since she was Vermont's sister, she was his sister too. Lucia was completely confused. Lucia's second brother is the captain of the invincible mercenary army famous throughout the continent. The girl was surprised. Are all Lenore and Sarah? Brother number two hugged the baby, saying that she looked like a fox, but her fur was strange, silver pink. Vermont hurried his brother as his father was waiting, but he refused to leave without payment. While waiting for the customer, Hekin played with his sister, which greatly irritated Vermont. Suddenly a man with a hood over his face entered the house. Hekan greeted him, calling him Your Eminence. The girl was stunned. As a princess, she rarely saw the bishop. He only appeared at the most important celebrations. The bishop demanded proof that the children had been saved. As Vermont examined it, he noticed a brooch with the same emblem he had seen earlier. Hekan reported that the slavers were dead, then handed the bishop what he asked for, a piece of paper covered with writing. The man grabbed it, read it, and crumpled it. The commander asked the priest if he was interested in whether everything was all right with the children, to which he replied with a forced smile that he had no doubt that they were treating them well. The bishop was about to say goodbye when Vermont suddenly stopped him. He was interested in where the slave traders got a pass to the Great Temple and why the bishop would turn to mercenaries. To which the man waved it off, emphasizing that he was too curious for a mercenary. Vermont apologized but continued. He thought the bishop was somehow connected to the slave trade. The man covered the brooch with his hand. He didn't care about the children, he just wanted to cover his tracks. The bishop turned around silently and waved his hand. Knights began to come out from all sides. As a parting word, the man added that they would die today because of their curiosity. Vermont said that if God knew what the temple had become, he would send heavenly punishment. Vermont tried to find a reasonable and safe way out of the situation and then gave the command to attack. Hikan took out his sword and rushed into battle. The knights fell one after another. The bishop tried to escape, but Vermont stopped him with his magic. Hikon asked the bishop to remind him what would happen when there was no room left for God in the temple. God would send a great punishment. Even though Hikon had killed the bishop and the Knights of the Holy Order, he felt relieved. Although his brother was clearly not happy about it. But if Vermont and Lucia returned home, where their father was waiting for them, smiling happily. No matter how powerful and famous the mercenary is, he is just a mercenary. If he decides to accuse the bishop of slave trading, and already dead, everyone will side with the temple. It is easier to accuse the mercenary. When Ionel was a princess, she judged only by appearances and had no idea what they were really like. If she hadn't been reborn, she would never have known. But something worried Vermont even more. It seemed that the bishop was possessed by a divine beast. He almost revealed himself. But the mad dog killed him first. Hikon promised to arrive when he finished his business. El Haran family is throwing a banquet. The future duchess needs to be introduced to everyone. Vermont asks his father if he is sure, to which his father replies that war is coming. Neither the prince nor the bishop would reveal their plans so easily. There is someone else behind them, and he has encroached on the Silver Fox's domain. Lenore won't let this go. They're in for a real fight. Daddy smiled and, touching the baby's face, said, "We have nothing to be afraid of." A few days later, Duke Elharan sent out an invitation to a banquet to all the nobility of the Rochim Empire, which would take place at his residence. The invitation read in large letters, "A banquet in honor of the young duchess, the true daughter of Duke Elharan." Better tried on dresses. The child was exhausted. This was the 10th dress. She was waiting for the servants to decide. And here it is, cute even by the capital's standards. When suddenly Aiden ordered the next dress to be brought in. Even in her past life, she had never been bullied like this. And the child screamed. Aiden exhaled and called a break. The butler brought sweets and lemonade. Lucia began to eat. She was confused that he was just standing there watching her eat, and the little girl tried to offer Aiden a cookie. Aiden sat down next to her, saying that Lady Lucia was not only a divine beast, but also divinely cute. An agitated maid came in, informing him that the dress he had ordered for the Duchess had been taken. Aiden swore on his name that he would return the dress. And after such a fiery speech, he returned empty-handed, locked himself in the room, and refused to come out. Aiden's memories. Walking down the street, he picked up an apple that a woman had dropped, and when he tried to give it to her, she screamed. People started turning around, and a man threw a rock at him, screaming, "Monster." Aiden's skin was partially Aiden's door. He opened it and saw the little girl with the Duke. He said that everything had been explained to him. Someone had stolen Syria's dress right from the studio. The butler went to sort things out and then hid in the room. Lenore asked what happened. Aiden hesitated. He replied that he had met an acquaintance, and the Duke invited him to come with him. Aiden was upset by his behavior, to which he replied that he was going to return his wife's dress and the honor of the butler. They headed to Gavrien's atelier. It sells the best dresses on the entire continent. The outfits created by Gavrian are popular both within the Empire and beyond its borders. However, Gavrian doesn't care about fame or money. He creates only when inspiration comes. The nobility is measured not only by power or wealth, but also by the number of outfits from Gavrian. The father entered the studio. Seeing this handsome, stately man, the studio workers began to bustle about. They asked what kind of dress he would like, to which the Duke replied a yellow silk one with lace and a large neckline. The girls panicked. Lenore ordered Gavrian to be called and sat down. The baby in Aiden's arms watched as everyone was shaking with fear. She noticed one of the workers looking at her with disdain. No, not at her. At Aiden. Lenore turned to this worker. Since he was standing and staring, perhaps he wanted to tell where the dress had gone. The princess's maid took him. While they were all working hard, she simply took the dress. He didn't even have time to say that it was for the Duchess. The guy was lying, and even the little girl understood. Suddenly, a maid came in, saying that the dress needed to be altered. It was the wrong size. Lenore stood up and took the box with Saria's dress from her. The Duke asked me to tell Princess Bianca that he ordered the dress for his wife. Her Highness liked it so much that the maid asked if the Duke would agree to give it to the princess. He is a duke, of course, but he would not dare to object to a member of the imperial family. The maid continued to insist. Lucia was very worried. She wanted the maid to stop, because she was afraid that her father could arrange a bloody massacre in broad daylight. Lenore, having learned that the princess had tried it on, exhaled and said that he would have to order a new one. And with an unperturbed look, he tore the dress to shreds. Everyone stared at him in horror. And the Duke said that he would not allow his wife to walk around in some rags because that was not right. The forest of divine beasts is always quiet and calm. But in the human world, things are different. The imperial family is constantly plotting, and the constant barbarian raids force one to be on guard at all times. On top of that, Lenore was faced with a ton of minor problems, which was unpleasant, but this was too much. The maid angrily threatens the Count, saying that if the prince finds out, he will The Count agrees, but coming closer, he asks what she thinks awaits her for stealing the Count's wife's dress. The maid leaves quickly. Gavrian comes out to the guests. The workers rush to him in tears. He asks what happened. Lenore activates his charms. He apologizes for the commotion. He ordered a dress, and it turns out it's already been worn. Lenore can't let his wife wear a used dress, nor can he let anyone else wear it. But now she has nothing to wear to the banquet. He continued with the sweetest charisma, which knocked everyone off their feet. He understood that there was very little time, but he begged me to sew another one. Gavrian was simply enchanted by him. His eyes were shining. He had no chance to refuse. With the words, "I will pay as much as you wish," Lenore handed over a blank check. Gavrian wrote down the amount. But the Duke did not like it, and he corrected the 10 million. Lenore added 2 zeros. It was a mind-boggling sum for a single dress. Not even the imperial family could have. As they were leaving, they were discussing how well everything had gone, when suddenly that lying guy blurted out, "Monster." And they stopped. The Duke said loudly and distinctly that the staff seemed to have no manners at all. They had no business here anymore. The Count was blazing. Aiden was embarrassed. The girl was scolding the guy for his attitude towards the clients. Lucia was angry. This guy first says all sorts of nasty things, and now he's staring at them. If she were older, she would have given him such a beating. As they were getting into the carriage, they heard a noise. The same mysterious melody began to play, and for no apparent reason, the scoundrel fell unconscious. At breakfast, the little girl wondered what this was a strange melody. This time, she heard something like laughter. The servants came to inform his lordship of Gavrian's arrival. Gavrian was very glad to meet him. Gavrian apologized for the incident with the dress, and he was very sorry that he had to look for a replacement. But he had designed a new dress not only for the Duchess, as had been agreed, but also for the young lady. Lucia rejoiced. She fell in love with Gavrian with all her heart, who would free her from this hell with the fitting. Savior. Gavrian doesn't make children's clothes, but he decided to make a dress especially for the little countess. No reason to refuse. Lucia saw the worried butler. When they returned home, Aiden sat as if nothing had happened. His face was completely emotionless. The little girl knew nothing of his past, but she understood how much those words had hurt him. And now that moment had fluttered from his memory like a butterfly. When it was time for a snack, the mask of imperturbability fell. Aiden began to cry. He said he was unworthy of serving Duke El Haran, when in fact everything rested on Aiden alone. The little girl was dumbfounded. He manages to deal with wayward gods who don't want to listen to anyone at all. And only Aiden can do all this. Aiden added that he never deserved to be his lordship's butler. There was no place for such a monster in this world. Lucia didn't expect to hear that. The baby screamed and crawled towards the butler. She hugged Aiden and tried to tell him that he was not a monster. Lucia couldn't express even half of what she wanted to say. But still, having given him the cookie, she was sure that he understood her. Foxy didn't know what had happened between them. But even if Aiden had done something bad, that was no reason. She wondered if Aiden had done something terrible. Dad was a good judge of character. He trusted Aiden, and so did Lucia. Time passed. And finally, the day came when Mom finished preparing for Lucia's ceremony. She was about to arrive. Divine beasts always perform this ceremony when someone is born. It is an important moment in the life of each beast. So Mom stayed in the forest to prepare everything. The petals swirled and flared up. Saria appeared from the circle. Syria rushed to Lucia, taking her tenderly in her arms. They forgot about Daddy, and he asked to be embraced. The lady tried on the dress. She was delightful. That's what happens when a genius takes on the job. When suddenly the father ordered to bring the following. The color is wrong, does not emphasize the charm of Saria. The following does not match Lucia's dress. Another one? He just does not like. Saria's patience was running out. As soon as she wanted to say something, Lenore suggested that she choose jewelry for Lucia. She didn't choose her dress as carefully as she did Lucia's jewelry. Mom took a massive chain with a huge stone. Dad, looking at the situation, smiled. Taking a thin chain with a small rose from the box, he offered it. Like a true sly fox, Dad said that the choice of a wife was, of course, beautiful, but a little difficult for Lucia. The baby fell asleep, and the mother told her that while she was preparing for the ceremony, the elders came. This was unexpected for father understood that it was strange to delay the ceremony, but not so much that the elders would come. Saria said that Vizilla had returned. Father was surprised. He would not have moved without a reason. He may have learned that Lucia had turned back into a fox. Vermont said that for some reason his magic had worn off. And when Lucia turned, it started raining right away. Mom pointed out that Lucia is not like them. She is special. Lucia was born to a silver fox and a red wolf. Usually, in such cases, children belong to only one of the species. Each of the divine beasts has characteristics that are not common to any other species. Lucia is a silver fox, but she has pink ears and a tail. If Lucia really does belong to a separate species, something could happen that Lanner and Saria would never want. The baby woke up, stretched all her paws. Her father was lying next to her. Dad is a handsome man, of course, but he needs to get ready for the banquet. Vermont entered their chambers in search of a ball of wool and began the spell of turning Lucia into a human. Father changed his clothes, but Vermont decided to remain in his robe, and they set out for the banquet. The palace is exquisitely decorated. The guests gather and discuss the luxury surrounding them and the count. The door swung open, and the butler announced the arrival of the Duke and Duchess of El-Haran. They looked amazing. The guests were amazed by their beauty and the fact that the Duke was not a scary old man. Someone whispered that the Duchess was a simpleton compared to the Duke. They heard them because their hearing was better than that of humans. Mom will not forgive those who treated her disrespectfully. Lucia couldn't even imagine what would happen if she got angry. The guests began to make noise, and two men entered the hall. The tower guard and the captain of the mercenaries, Hikan, the same mad dog. A whisper went around. People said that, of course, there were rumors that the Duke had hired security for his daughter. But who would have thought that it would be the Runhild sorcerer and the mad dog? Now you can't even get within 100 steps of the young Duchess, to which Lenore replied that he didn't need it. Saria was already in storage, and she would take what she needed. Mohiant asked if they would have robbed his vault if he had not agreed, to which his father replied that he had allowed it after all. The Duke introduces the guests who have arrived. Mr. Vermont and Mr. Hiken have agreed to honor them with their presence at the celebration of Stella's birthday, also adding that these are not all the guests of this evening. Others, no less highly respected, will arrive soon. Trumpets sounded, signaling the arrival of new guests. The butler introduced His Highness the Crown Prince Agris de Roakem, as well as Her Highness the Princess Bianca. The nobles greeted each other. The prince asked to forgive them for being late. He turned to the Duchess, saying that he was glad to finally meet her in person. The Duchess introduced herself in an appropriate manner. Agris noticed the child in Saria's arms and turned to her, saying how pleased he was to meet her. Ionel remembered the night he had killed her and their father, and she brazenly turned away from the prince. He suggested to the parents that if they would allow it, he would like to be their daughter's godfather. The guests were amazed. It would be an incredible honor for any noble family if the prince himself, the future emperor, offered to be the godfather of their children. But the imperial family and Duke El-Haran are not that close. In other words, this proposal is an attempt to improve relations. Ironically, the villain who killed Ionel is now claiming to be her godfather. Mom turned him down, saying they had already chosen a godfather for their daughter. The father and the prince went away to talk. The girls tried to approach Saria to get to know her better. Praising her outfit and her daughter, they asked for forgiveness for disturbing them. The little girl thought, they want to talk to Saria, but they are afraid because she seems distant and arrogant. And Vermont and Hiken are not very friendly. The girls argued in whispers that something else needed to be said. Saria smiled and thanked them, saying that their lovely dresses were no worse than hers. The guest asked what the young Duchess's name was, to which Lucia wanted to answer herself, and proudly introduced herself as Usha. Lucia hid in shame. Vermont and Hiken turned away, trying to hold back their laughter. The girls glowed, looking at this sweetest creature. Bianca came up to greet them and introduce herself. Sarayent Roakim, and she suggested chatting. Her father, the Duke of Sarayent, was eager to attend the banquet, but unfortunately he was not feeling well. She asked the Duchess if she had a middle name. Bianca thought, she is the only daughter of the Duke, companion of the Crown Prince, future Empress. The Duchess is probably ashamed in front of her magnificence. To which Saria coldly replied, no. The princess suggested that she should apologize, to which the Duchess replied that she had not been offended in the least. She tried to humiliate her mother with her title, but nothing worked. Suddenly, the lady with whom the princess approached began to lower her glass. Lucia did not want her mother's dress to be ruined and reached out in an attempt to stop her. The girl spilled champagne on the girl and she screamed, which drew the attention of those present to the situation. The brothers rushed to help. Hiken grabbed the bottle, broke it, and held the shard to the culprit, asking if she wanted to die. The princess stood up for the lady, saying that Lady Azarel had simply made a mistake and was waiting for an apology from Saria for her subordinate's behavior. The Duchess stopped her son, saying that they wanted to ruin her dress, but they poured it on her girl, and you won't get an apology from them. Adding that the young Duchess would not be able to appear in high society anytime soon, the princess took offense and rushed away. Lenore approached, saying to do with the princess as she wishes, since parents must be responsible for their children. The mother gave her daughter to her brother and told the guests not to pay attention and to enjoy the banquet. Lucia felt a heat, as if she was being torn apart from the inside. Hikon became agitated. A flash of light, and the child turned into a fox. Hikon turned to his brother, but he was not there. At that time, Vermont was watching an unknown burning palace. It was urgent to find the brother. Hikon hid the baby on the terrace, ordering her not to stick her head out. He would be back soon. The banquet is in full swing. Lucia is hiding in the corner of the terrace. No one will come here for sure. When suddenly, searching for a flash of light, Agris entered. He saw a small silver fox, which surprised him greatly. The little one became nervous. Suddenly, an unknown voice ordered her to run. Lucia was at a loss. There was nowhere to run. The voice showed her the way. Agris extended his hand to the fox, and she took off. The girl was tired. She stopped in the hope that she had managed to get away. But the voice screamed about trouble. Terrible trouble, he is here. It is scary. How scary? She turned around and saw Peyren, Abeloda. She wanted to ask him for help, but she remembered how he protected her in her past life. But other than that, he never helped anyone. Footsteps were heard. Agris was catching up with her. And Lucia, panicking, threw herself on Peyren's back, hiding under his cloak. They greeted each other, and Agris asked him if he had seen the silver animal, to which he replied in the negative. Agris started talking about Princess Ionel, saying how painful it was for him to remember her, because she was so kind and sweet until she went crazy. He added that it was all his fault. He should have paid more attention to her. Taken better care of her, then everything could have been different. He was a bad brother and asked what Sir Abelard thought of it. But he only answered that he had nothing to say, and that only one man knew the answer. Her Highness, only she can tell how it all happened. Abelard's first memory. It could have been a disaster. Born without parents, not belonging to any of the divine beasts. The elders said that even their best knights might not be able to cope with another cataclysm. But the divine beasts protested. They would not allow them to kill an innocent child. Nothing terrible had happened yet. These events sowed discord. Opinions were divided. Abelard remembered everything as if it had happened yesterday. In the end, they decided to let him live. But there were those who were still afraid of the very fact of his existence. For safety's sake, they put him in chains. Having learned to transform into a human, he left the forest of divine beasts and went to the world of people. Having no home, no family, he just wandered aimlessly. And he decided to join the ranks of the Emperor, to see what he could achieve. A spontaneous decision, a desire to dispel boredom and brighten up the gray everyday life. So he became the princess's bodyguard. When they first met, she was 16. At first glance, she was a very ordinary princess, but still, something distinguished her from others. She cared about her subjects. Everyone around loved Ionel. Her sincerity could not leave anyone indifferent. She infected everyone with her ringing laughter. She was as kind to Peyren as she was to everyone else. And although she irritated Peyren, he wanted her attention more for himself than for others. Sometimes he felt uneasy about his feelings. He was happy with his life and work, but one day they were caught in a downpour, and the princess said that she was sure that Abelode would become a hero. His name would spread throughout the continent. Of course, everyone will know who will cause the disaster, he thought. The princess was beautiful. Her smile was mesmerizing. That's when he started to feel something strange. It seemed like nothing had changed, but every day he seemed to be getting stupider. Abelard felt that if he distanced himself from her, this feeling would disappear. So he did, stating his intentions directly. He was going to the front, the southern front line. The castle is on fire. He went to war to be away from the princess. It seemed that he would have no time to think about the princess. He was surrounded only by death. In the chaos of battle, he tried to forget the one thing that made his heart flutter. But how could he control it? Amidst the dust, the fire that engulfed the field, when he swung his sword, when someone's life was on the line. He remembered her. He must have gone mad. He must not see the princess. With such thoughts, he went to the front. But even far from her, he could not forget her. No matter how hard he tried to deny the truth, he finally had to accept it. He had never experienced anything like this before. But he decided to put an end to this war. That way he'll earn everyone's respect. He'll become a hero, just like she said, and he'll return to the palace. Maybe then she'll smile at him again. He won victory after victory. The high priest, impressed by his dedication, appointed Abelard captain of the knights. After all, he became a hero, famous throughout the continent. Surely the princess could not even imagine how her words would affect him. He wondered what she would say now, what she would wish for, just to see her smile again. But the princess never knew who he had become. When he returned, she was dead. After Abelard's answer, Agris left. He took the fox out from under his cloak and asked if the Duke hadn't warned him not to be seen by people. Lucia worriedly recalled the 3 rules of the divine beasts. Abelard promised to return her to her parents. Suddenly, the alarmed brothers ran up to them. Hikon took the baby from the lord, thinking that he had kidnapped her. Lucia rebelled, but could not explain everything. Vermont demanded an explanation. Abelard told about the prince. Vermin couldn't understand how this could happen. Twice. Hikon kindly suggested that if the character was bad, then the magic wasn't very good either. Abelard was surprised that the little girl still couldn't turn into a human. The brothers got angry. Vermont offered to show him what happens to those who offend Lucia. Vermont explained that she couldn't transform herself yet, so he had to constantly maintain the transformation spell. But for some unknown reason, she turns back. If this happens in public, there will be no end to the problems. Abelard offers to help Lou and Stella turn into a human. There was a real stir that day. The Duke himself and his wife appeared in public for the first time in a long time, and they showed off their lovely daughter. The Duke's family, who silently defended the northern borders, held a truly magnificent reception, not without a quarrel with the imperial family. Now the high society has to take sides. Vermont tells his father that the prince saw Lucia in animal form. Fortunately, Perrin was passing by and helped her. He also promised to help her learn how to turn into a human. Father did not like this, and he decided that it was time to send a message to Moyant. After the banquet, Lucia firmly decided to learn to walk. As soon as the servants found out about this, they immediately arranged everything so that she would not hurt herself, no matter where she fell. The father entered the room, informing Hikon that they were leaving soon. Perrin was waiting for them. The little girl thought, Agris is sure that Dad wants to seize the throne, and now the relationship between them is completely ruined. And so he openly went to meet with the commander of the knights himself. So, Father wants political attention. When the servant arrived at the palace, he informed that Sir Abelard was currently absent. Father was surprised that such a grumbler had friends. A boy came out to them, asking what was going on. The guests were puzzled. The boy looked very much like Abelard. The boy greeted the guests and introduced himself as Duke Abelard's cousin, Ian. The little girl was surprised by their resemblance. Was he really a divine beast too? And her father asked if they could wait for Perrin here. Ian led them into the room and asked if they had come for this matter, and his father answered in the affirmative. The boy added that, at Sir Abelodi's request, he would speak only to the young duchess. And they left the little girl with the young tutor. Ian asked Lucia if she could become a fox. She waved her hand negatively. So she herself could not become either a human or an animal. He apologized and touched her forehead with his finger. As he cast the spell, he concluded that she was a special species, the existence of which would lead to disaster. The little girl tensed up. Long ago, the divine beast joined forces to prevent an impending disaster. This is something that all the inhabitants of the continent have known since childhood. Divine beasts are born from fragments of the soul of the creator god. Of course, this happens rarely, but sometimes the broken piece turns out to be larger than the rest. Then a special species appears. Such animals are closest to God. However, it is difficult to control such a huge force, and in the end it breaks out, which leads to a global catastrophe. The little girl trembled. Ian apologized to the young duchess and picked her up. She didn't want the people she cared about most to get hurt. The boy offered to show her something. They went out into the garden, and he covered her eyes with his hand. Opening them, she was surprised that nothing had changed. Suddenly, she noticed pink butterflies. They were worriedly saying that Lucia had been caught. What should they do? The boy explained that they were spirits. They noticed that she saw them and headed towards her. Lucia was surprised because she was told that after the disaster, the divine beasts lost contact with the spirits. The spirits ran away from Ian. Ian told the little girl to wait for her at the fountain. She kept thinking, is he also a special species? But why were they afraid of him? But not of her. The spirits spoke to Lucia. They asked if they were beautiful and offered her to touch themselves. She touched the butterfly, and suddenly the butterfly turned into a fox. They played with her. Some turned into birds, fish, tickled her, rejoiced at the girl's smile. Lucia couldn't hold on and almost fell into the water. But the spirits supported her. In order to calm the child, the spirits decided to sing. The same melody that played every time she was in danger began to play. The spirits helped her even when she was reborn. Ian came to take her. The spirits made noise, saying that he was a bad person. The boy said that there was a bishop here. It was better not to cross paths with him. The girl didn't understand. The bishop had an impeccable reputation. Ian was even dressed like a novice, and there were spirits everywhere. A melody began to play and a bright light flashed. The spirits tried to save Lucia. Their number increased several times. Lightning struck, and they began to circle around the tower. The story returns to the trial of the harbinger of disaster. Lenore intercedes, saying that no matter what, you can't kill a newborn. He hasn't done anything yet. He won't let that happen. Everyone argued for a long time, but in the end, Perrin was saved. True, they put a collar on him, prohibiting the use of divine powers. The elders pretend to be merciful, but they are really just a bunch of scum. Their skin is more important to them than the lives of others, Lenore thought. Now he remembered why he left the council. Perrin is still very young. In human form, he should be a teenager, but with his powers, he can transform into an adult. However, when the magic is unstable, he returns to his normal form to recover. Hikon noted that Perrin still seems to be out of his mind. The father contacted Mahant and said that Perrin had asked if it was possible to bring a man back to life. When he came to the forest, he asked the elders for help right in front of everyone. That's where the rumors started that he had gone crazy. Hikon got nervous, asking if his father was sure he could trust Lush, to which his father replied that he wouldn't harm the child. Opening the door, they saw the bishop accompanied by knights, which they were clearly not happy about. The father asked them to forgive him, but they were there on another matter, to which His Eminence replied that he knew, and that was why he had come, because they would never have come to see him. He was driving Lenore wild. It was hard for him to explain, but it felt like he somehow guessed that Lenore was a divine beast. The bishop called the Duke for a few words. He told him that there had been a terrible fire in the house of the Marquis of Azarel, and Lenore was suspected of starting the fire. The father was surprised. The bishop continued. Only the room of the Marquis and Marchioness burned down. They say magic was involved. Moreover, during the banquet, the Marquis behaved rudely towards his wife, and there are rumors that it was Lenore who hired the tower guard for this. Lenore laughed, saying that if the tower keeper himself had listened to him, he would have achieved independence for the duchy long ago. He himself thought that it seemed they had been found out. That day, Vermont decided to wipe the Marquis' family off the face of the empire. But Lenore promised Syria that there would be no problems, telling his son at the end that it was impossible for the Marquis and Marchioness to die on his daughter's birthday. In the end, they compromised and decided to simply burn down their house. Lenore has no idea who could have done it. The priest continued, saying that not long ago the bishop had gone to the Creator. Since then, strange things had begun to happen. He hoped that his lordship would refrain from senseless killings. The Duke waved away the bishop's hand and replied that only if His Eminence showed him the right way. The bishop gave him a menacing look. Afterwards, having cheered up, he casually asked to introduce him to the young duchess. The father replied that she was still a baby and was afraid of strangers. The bishop, as if he had not heard, looked towards the house looking for the girl. The father was very irritated, wondering why this old fox needed his daughter. Suddenly, they saw a flash of light and lightning that destroyed the sacred tower. The bishop lost consciousness. The father did not understand what had happened. He and his son were worried. Was it really the work of Lucia's powers? The spirits bragged about their powers to the girl. Lucia tried to stop them, but they didn't even listen to her. Ian called other spirits, and they immediately swallowed the pranksters. Everything went quiet. The boy said, "Here it is. The power of a special kind. Their burden." Now Lucia had an idea of what could happen if it got out of control. An incredibly powerful force that is impossible to resist. If she does not learn to control it, things could turn out much worse. The boy fell to the ground, gasping for breath, saying, "Trust no one." He grabbed his neck, and she saw the seal and the scratches. Ian forbade her to come near him. The boy was writhing in pain. Lucia couldn't leave him with his neck torn to the point of bleeding. She tried to help him, and suddenly he saw Princess Ionel in front of him and called her by name. Dad and brother came running, and Dad picked up the baby. He couldn't believe that her power was out of control. That meant he'd have to do something. Lucia fell asleep. In her sleep, she thought that she and Ian belonged to a special species and could see spirits and use their power. And what is this? The strange tattoo seems to be holding Ian back, causing pain when he uses his powers. She was worried that she would suffer the same fate if she did not learn to control the spirits. She felt sorry that he was suffering because of her. She wondered why he called her Ionel, if they had met in a past life. No, she would have remembered. By the way, she came here to learn how to turn into a human, but so far there has been no progress. Next time they meet, she will definitely ask him. The bishop reported what had happened. Vazilla. They discussed secret matters, and Vazilla ordered that they not take their eyes off the young duchess. Great changes were coming, and they did not need any trouble. Kneeling, the bishop assured them that he would take care of everything, calling Vazilla the Lord. It's been a month now, and the family has been taking care of Lucia all this time. They brought her to the chambers after she lost consciousness, and they haven't left her for a minute. It was as if they looked at her differently. In her past life, when she was sick, the servants took good care of her. They were close, but still, they were not her family. Her father never had time to even visit her. Even though she was surrounded by care, she felt so lonely. Now she is not alone, but they are going too far. 2 days later. Sitting on his brother's lap, Hikan comforted her because he thought that Lucia was worried about the upcoming ceremony. Suddenly, Vermont fell on their heads. Seeing Lucia, he deftly took her away from her brother, inviting him to a picnic. They knew nothing about picnics. Lucia watched in surprise, wondering if her brothers had never been to picnics. Vermont suggested going to one of the popular places and just repeating what the others did. Hikan suggested stocking up on food, collecting enough for a week, and asked if that would be enough. For which his brother kicked him and Hikan went to get lunch. The little girl exhaled. At least Vermont was behaving adequately, and he suddenly said that he hoped that his brother would not forget the sofa. After much trial and error, they set off. The little girl asked her brothers to look around, and they waved approvingly. Without the baby, they have nothing to talk about. Hikan noted that they are like elderly parents who do not want their child to grow up. The little girl was appraisingly studying the park. It was beautiful. Everything was done with taste. Quite lively. When suddenly, by chance, she ran into a boy. She fell. The boy extended his hand, apologized, and asked if she was hurt. The little girl answered negatively and smiled sweetly. The boy was struck by her smile, took her hand, and in all seriousness, he shouted out a proposal of marriage. Hearing this, Vermont dropped the basket. Hikan tore the blanket. Apparently, the brothers were not delighted with their sister's new friend. Because of the torn blanket, they had to join the children and the elderly woman. The adults were extremely awkward. The boy introduced himself. His name is Ilix, and this is his twin sister, and asked what the baby's name is. The girl introduced herself as Lucia, hesitated, and corrected it to Lucia. Ilix noticed what a wonderful name she had, and he's smart. He pretends not to notice how those two are looking at him. He'll go far. His sister, on the contrary, looks sweet and modest. She opened the box and offered Lucia a treat. Before this day, Lucia had never interacted with people her own age, either in her past life or in this one. Her father had always been overprotective of her, so she could only interact with the maids. Lucia was happy about the new acquaintance. It was quite funny. The brothers were patient as best they could. Suddenly, some boy ran up with a bucket of earth and scattered it on their food. He joyfully shouted that now everything corresponded to their situation. Lucia furiously shouted for him to apologize right now, came and ruined their picnic. He thinks he can behave like this because of the difference in status. The girl wondered if the future of the Rocham Empire was really that sad. Hikan took a bottle out of the basket. Seeing that Lucia noticed his intentions, he awkwardly pressed the bottle to himself and smiled. Vermont's face was ablaze with a thirst for revenge. Lucia was torn apart, trying to distract them. They couldn't allow rumors to spread that a fight had broken out in the park because of the young duchess. The bully shouted that she was a coward, hiding behind adults. To which the brothers replied that he had a chance to escape unharmed, but now, one word from Lucia, and they would kill him. The hooligan and his gang ran away. Lucia tried to calm her friend down, but the indignant ladies came up to them and started yelling at the little girl. Family above the Elheron family is the Emperor's family. They recognized Lucia, so they apologized and left immediately. The boy was very upset. He just wanted to spend time with his bride. Lucia said that it was too early for her to be a bride, but they could still be friends. Seaside Empire, Baleen City. Praising the beauty of the place, saying that it is thanks to his friend, Lenore greets the hiding Mohyanta. The father explained that Lucia's birthday ceremony was coming up soon, and it seemed that his daughter belonged to a special species, and he didn't want anyone to know about it. All the divine beasts remember the story of Peyran. Lenore will not stand by while his daughter is being bullied. Mohyant's help. He agrees, saying that he will open the vault so that Lenore can take what he needs to contain her power.